And our second reading from Scripture this morning is from Luke chapter 4. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone." The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And he said to them, "I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. If you worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus answered, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." The devil led him to Jerusalem and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down from here. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." When the devil had finished all this tempting, he left him until an opportune time. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. A few years ago, I remember hearing a talk by a Christian minister that was called "Changing the World Through the Lord's Supper." It was deliberately a provocative title. How can it be that when we gather, as we do most Sundays here at 11 o'clock, to take bread and, apart from COVID times, to take wine, that act of gathering to worship and to receive can somehow change the world? But as the talk went on, I found it very convincing that there's something about that service of gathering for the Lord's Supper that has enormous power and potential. As I've been preparing for this Sunday's sermon, I almost want to say the same sort of thing about the season of Lent, changing the world through these 40 days and 40 nights in the lead up to Easter. And as with the idea of changing the world through the Lord's Supper, that might sound unbelievable to you. This season where Christians historically have thought about their temptations, trying to renounce things, self-denial, even if it's as simple as giving up something like chocolate. Well, at best, that might just seem like a series of very personal decisions and practices that you choose or maybe not choose to take up. At its worst, perhaps it seems like something extreme if you're really to take Lent seriously and go in for some big sort of regime of fasting and praying. Something a bit weird and, whether very personal or very extreme, kind of irrelevant to the broader world. I guess it's because of how aware we are at the moment in particular of the darkness of our world, that the idea of the season of Lent having power to change our world feels particularly strange, particularly hard to swallow. Lent might be a thing that religious people do, but how can it speak to the bigger issues in our world today, not least what's going on in Ukraine? But as we come to think about that reading from Luke's Gospel, and the temptations of Jesus, I want to put it to you, I might not persuade you all the way, but I want to put it to you that thinking about temptations, and particularly the temptations of Jesus, does show us how this season of Lent has enormous power for us and for our whole world. But to get there, we need to just think a little bit about what's going on with these temptations, and in the first place, the insight that they give us into what temptation is at all. It's easy to think of temptation as being something like, there's an open ice cream tub in the freezer and I really want to go there and eat it. And if you do that, you reduce it to a sort of, I have this sort of natural urge instinct that I'm trying to fight off. What's interesting about the temptations that Jesus experiences in that wilderness is that in the case of all three of them, they are what you might call very natural things and very good things for him to have. So the first one is bread, not an ice cream tub in the freezer. He's been hungry for a long time. It's the most natural thing in the world to break his fast, to eat the bread. The second one might sound more sort of extreme and surprising when the devil shows him all the authority in the world and says, you can have all of this. But Jesus isn't just an ordinary person at this point. Luke has been at pains to show through his first 3 chapters of the gospel that Jesus rightfully could have and claim all that authority. This isn't him being offered something sort of crazy and outlandish. This is him being offered what is rightfully his. In that sense, it's not far away from bread. It's something normal and natural for him and good. And the third one, well, you could say he's been offered safety. Throw yourself off and get the angels to protect you on the way down. When we think about temptation, we might think of the sort of more lurid, the more outlandish, the sort of thing that might make the Daily Mail sidebar of shame. But here, it's ordinary things. Normal things, good things, bread, authority, and safety. The issue with temptation here for Jesus is that he is being invited by the devil at this point to use his power to get those things now, to kind of grab hold of them, and crucially, to do that at the expense of God. To kind of put those things, bread and authority and safety, in the top position in his life at the expense of God being there. And you see that in the way that Jesus responds. Each time when he's been tempted by these good and normal things for him, his response is to quote from the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, which we would have known, and to quote particularly from the part of the Bible where God comes and teaches his people what it means to belong to him. What it looks like to have him as the number one person at the center of your life. It's from all the quotations that Jesus brings out against the devil are from the book of Deuteronomy. And they all sort of circle around that famous line or two from the book of Deuteronomy about the Lord our God being one Lord and loving the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. The idea in the book of Deuteronomy is that God is to have that complete, all-encompassing, total, absolute allegiance, and everything else in life sort of fits around him. And so by quoting from that part of the Bible in particular, Jesus is giving us an insight. The temptations are good things. But if he goes the way that the devil invites him to, it would be to put those good things ahead of God. And to say, rather than God being the one I have at the center of my life, this thing is instead. And it seems to me that that is what temptation is in every single human being's life. As we consider the temptation of Jesus, if you like, we get a window into what it means for anyone to experience temptation. You might think of it like this. As we read Scripture and encounter God, one of the things that we do is we discover, if you like, the sort of the motorway, the highway that he has laid out for us, the sort of life that he calls us to lead, with him at the center, pursuing him above all else, and around him, or sort of flowing out from him, a lifestyle of seeking justice and doing good and caring for the oppressed and honoring and loving our neighbor and discharging the duties and responsibilities that God gives us. There's the motorway before us. Temptation, if you like, is to see the slip road off to the left or right and to think that might take me to a better destination, or that might be a shortcut to where I actually want to go. Jesus is, if you like, given the slip roads, left or right. You want to be safe? Come on, just take this slip road and you'll get safety. But he knows that to do that will be to veer off the course God has for his life with God at the center. That is how temptation actually works in all of our lives. Now, on the one hand, it means that temptation is very subtle. Because we're not saying here, when you start to think about the temptations Jesus experiences, that they're sort of outlandishly bad things that you would instinctively know you don't want to pursue. bread, authority and safety are normal and natural things to want. And so, a lot of the time in our lives, if you like, we will be taking the slip road off without even realizing we're doing it. And we'll be able to sort of justify it because we're pursuing a good thing that really is good. And when we're sort of caught up in experiencing temptation to depart from the life that God lays out for us, there's a good chance it will feel like the most normal and natural thing in the world. So perhaps you saw or heard Matt Hancock's interview a week or so ago about his experience of breaking the rules in lockdown and having an affair with one of his aides. And it was very clear that although he recognized he had done wrong in breaking the lockdown rules, there was a sense in which he couldn't help himself because he said, "We fell in love, and that's something that was completely outside of my control." As he was tempted to break his marriage vows and, in that sense, depart from the path that was laid out before him, it didn't seem like a big veering off the road. It seemed like the most normal thing in the world because he fell in love. So my point is not to sort of pick on Matt Hancock, but to say that's the sort of insight I think that understanding temptation in the way that Jesus lays out for us gives to us. It's subtle. And even if, like Matt Hancock, we don't sort of take the road easily, it will still be a battle. It will still be hard for us to stay on the road. Because the slip roads off to the left and right will look like they're taking us to a good destination. So in the novel Jane Eyre, when Jane rejects in the end the advances of Mr. Rochester, who she knows will be a wonderful husband, but he's already married, the way that the story is told is extraordinary insight into the internal struggle. The slip road off of accepting Mr. Rochester's advances doesn't look like a road to nowhere. It looks full of wonderful attraction. This is how part of the novel goes. I was experiencing an ordeal. This is Jane speaking. A hand of fiery iron grasped my vitals. Terrible moment, full of struggle, blackness, burning. Not a human being that ever lived could wish to be loved better than I was loved. And him who thus loved me, I absolutely worshipped. And I must renounce love and idol. One drear word comprised my intolerable duty. Depart. Mr. Rochester doesn't accept that, depart. He keeps on advancing and trying to win her. And she goes on, while he spoke, my very conscience and reason turned traitors against me and charged me with crime in resisting him. They spoke almost as loud as feeling, and that clamoured wildly. Oh, comply, it said. Think of his misery, think of his danger. Look at his state when left alone. Remember his headlong nature. Consider the recklessness following on despair. Soothe him, save him, love him. Tell him you love him and will be his. Who in the world cares for you, or who will be injured by what you do? It goes on and on. It's a wonderful portrait, I think, you think, well, the motorway, the highway of living as God wanted didn't look like the wide open lanes in front of her. She had this enormous internal struggle. That's what it looks like to be tempted. And yet, not only is the temptation subtle, but if you like, you take the slip road off to the left or to the right, you find that what temptation does to you is actually a total takeover of your life. Because think about it, the temptation is if Jesus is right in the way he quotes back to the devil, the temptation is getting you to put that, whatever that thing is, in place of God. And that's going to dominate everything else in your life. Although it might not seem like that in the moment where you're tempted to go off to the left or right. When that good thing usurps God and becomes ultimate, everything else in your life will be affected. I can't find anyone who put this better than C.S. Lewis. He starts off with a sort of almost humorous example of this. He says the person who makes a dog the centre of their life loses in the end not only their human usefulness and dignity, but even the proper pleasure of dog keeping. Imagine if your whole life was sort of built around your dog. You would do anything for them. Well, in the end, you'd not be a very good dog owner. Dogs aren't meant to have that place of complete authority in a house. That's the job of cats. No, but you know what I mean. Dogs have their place as part of the family. If you put the dog at the centre of everything, you wouldn't care for the dog and you wouldn't care for anyone else in your life. But then he goes on, the man who makes alcohol his chief good loses not only his job but his palate and all power of enjoying the earlier pleasurable levels of intoxication. It's one of the tragedies of something like alcoholism. You lose the ability to enjoy alcohol and it ruins everything else. So the thing that you made ultimate, it gets destroyed and so does all else around it. He says it is a glorious thing to feel for a moment or two that the whole meaning of the universe is summed up in one woman, glorious so long as other duties and pleasure keep tearing you away from her. But clear the decks and so arrange your life that you will have nothing to do but contemplate her and what happens. When you fall in love with someone, there are moments where it feels like the world revolves around them, but your life can't stay that way because you'll become so obsessed and obsessive with that person that the relationship will be ruined, and so will everything else in your life as well. You'll lose your job, you'll lose your health, you'll lose your everything. That's what I mean by temptation being total. It's also, I think, drawing one more sort of implication from what Jesus shows us about temptation here. It is also an analysis that I think applies universally. Because if this, if you like, is towards the heart of the problem of the human condition, that we are all, in all sorts of different ways, tempted to put something in our lives ahead of God, to give something else that number one spot, and in that moment to veer off the highway, the good plans God has for our lives, to some other end, then this doesn't so much divide the world up into the really bad people who are doing the bad things and the good ones over here who have a sort of inner purity. This is a challenge, an affliction that all of us can experience. And to different intents and purposes, it might not look like we're doing all that much wrong. There are some things that you can, if you like, fix upon and make your ultimate, that throughout so much of your life will deliver for you and do you good. If you make your family everything to you, if they, in that sense, usurp God and sit in that number one spot, you might well project to the world and in your behavior to your family, be full of compassion, be full of concern and love and care. And it might not be many years down the road until, if you like, that idol, that thing that you've put ahead of God, stops delivering for you. When you can't handle the fact that your family don't necessarily want to spend as much time with you as you do with them, or you lose them, because in the end we lose everything. So this is a universal diagnosis. It applies to those of us who are looking like we're very good people, and it similarly applies to those who we know are very, very bad people. It's not as simple as saying, and we all want to say something like this at the moment, Vladimir Putin is just an evil man, full stop. Jesus Christ, Christianity, I think, would say there's something else going on. In fact, it's all the darker. I can't see into his heart, of course. But it would be plausible to say something like the good things of power, of national pride, have been warped into something terrible, dark, evil, megalomania. Or Matt Hancock, the good of relationships, the good of male and female, love and sex being warped into a self-serving affair that ruins his marriage. But then I think of my own life, when the good of food or the good of money warps into a greed and a spending on myself, or the good of rest and downtime warps into a neglect of my family. This diagnosis, if you like, this analysis, this anatomy of the human condition doesn't let us sit neatly. Here are the good guys, here are the bad guys. It's all the more subtle. Now, if that's what temptation is, then the question is, how do you overcome it? Because I guess that's where we'd like to be. If you're at all persuaded that that's what the sort of understanding of temptation that Jesus Christ gives us in this experience he has in the wilderness. We might think that the answer is just to try harder then. Be more Jane Eyre. Find that inner strength. It's fascinating. You see how Jane Eyre has increasingly been received. Jane is an incredibly powerful figure because she doesn't just go along with society. She doesn't just acquiesce and, well, of course you're going to marry Mr. Rochester and do what he says. She's held up as an example of, and I think rightly in one sense, as lots of people, when they analyse it, she's a proto-feminist because she has something that she stands for that stops her just going along with the way that women should behave in her society. So we might look at an example of someone like Jane and be inspired to try harder in the things that we are tempted to turn off the highway that God has laid out for us. As we, if we can, begin to see what they might be for us, our answer might be, well, get some more backbone, fight harder. You listen to the way that over and over again Jane is able to resist Mr. Rochester. It's kind of creepy at times. He comes up to her and strokes her forehead and kisses her cheek, and she has this internal struggle and keeps saying no. We might think, well, we've just got to fight like her. But it's so striking in Jane's case what it is that she falls back on in the end. This is what she says at one point. I will keep the law given by God. I will hold to the principles received by me when I was sane. In other words, when she wasn't in the grip of temptation. Laws and principles are not for the times when there is no temptation. They are for such moments as this, when body and souls rise in mutiny against their rigour. What she is saying is she doesn't just, find some sort of inner strength to resist the advances of Mr. Rochester. I will keep the law given by God. She looks beyond herself to someone who has the power to help her to stay on that highway. In a sense, that's exactly what Jesus does as well. When he is tempted to pursue those good things at the expense of God, he falls back on what he knows is true about God. That's why he quotes those verses from Deuteronomy. Now for us, I think we're in an even better position, if I can put it this way, than Jesus himself was. Because we don't just have, if you like, the revelation of God in the Old Testament, those verses from Deuteronomy which might give steel to your spine. We have Jesus himself, and we have his work on our behalf. It's so striking that at the end of our reading in verse 13, when the devil had finished all this tempting, he left him until an opportune time. Luke doesn't really return to that idea, an opportune time. But in the way that the narrative of Luke's gospel goes, you do find Jesus experiencing the same sort of temptations as he does in the wilderness at another point in his life. It's at the moment where he's being crucified. And people all around, if you like, step in to play the devil's role. And they look up at him and they say things like, save yourself. If you really are the Son of God, which is what the devil says to him, save yourself. They talk to each other. If he really is the Son of God, he'll save himself. It's the same sort of idea. Come on, Jesus, you don't want to lose your life. Safety's available. You could get it. Why are you going that way? Here's the slip road off. Then the most extraordinary thing at the heart of Christianity is that Jesus refuses that temptation as well. Charles Spurgeon, the 19th century Baptist minister, put it like this: Jesus Christ was up on the cross, nailed, bleeding, dying, looking down on the people betraying him and forsaking him and denying him. And in the greatest act of love in the history of the universe, he stayed. He stayed where he was. He didn't take the slip road. His course, his highway, his motorway was to die in our place if we belong to him. And so when we experience in our own lives all those slip roads tempting us to depart from the highway God has for us, all those ways that we just take a good thing and put it in top position, perhaps even more than Jane Eyre articulated, we don't just have the law of God to abide to and cling to. We have Jesus' deep, deep love for us and resolve to die for us. And so even though I will keep on failing to stick to that motorway, if you like, I have someone in Jesus Christ who will forgive me every time I fail and who will strengthen me next time the slip road appears to cling fast to him. That seems to me to be a power for good in my heart and good in the life of the world that nothing else can match. And that's the sense in which the season of Lent, when we think about these things in a particularly focused way, really does have the power to change the world. We'll be quiet for a few moments, then Nick will come and lead us in the rest of our service.